The scream tore through the healing chamber before anyone could stop it. Elena Voss dropped the bowl of crushed herbs she was carrying, and it shattered against the stone floor. She did not look down at the mess. Her eyes were fixed on the bed at the center of the room, where Alpha King Damien Ashgrove lay shaking, his back arched, his hands clawing at the sheets as if something inside him was trying to escape through his skin. "Hold him down," Elias Grant shouted, pushing past two guards who stood frozen at the door. The old healer's voice cracked with something Elena had never heard from him before. Fear. Elena moved without thinking. Years of training took over where panic tried to creep in. She pressed her palms against Damien's shoulders, feeling the heat radiating off his body, a heat far beyond any fever she had treated before. His eyes opened for a moment, glassy and unfocused, and for one heartbeat they found hers. "Elena," he whispered. It was barely a sound at all, more breath than word. Then his eyes rolled back, and his body went still. The silence that followed was worse than the screaming. Elias pressed 2 fingers to the king's throat, counting under his breath. The guards at the door exchanged a look Elena did not like, the kind of look men give each other when they are already thinking about what comes next, about who will lead, about which way the wind is about to blow. "He is alive," Elias finally said, and the room seemed to breathe again, but barely. "Someone bring me cold water and the silver needles. Now." The guards scrambled to obey, but Elena noticed something strange as they left. Neither of them asked what had happened, neither of them asked if the king would survive. They simply left to fetch supplies, their faces unreadable, their steps too calm for men who had just watched their leader convulse on his own bed. Elena had noticed a great many strange things over the past 3 weeks, ever since Damien returned from the diplomatic summit with the Ironwood pack looking pale and unsteady on his feet. At first, everyone assumed it was simple exhaustion, long negotiations, long nights, too much wine, and too little sleep. But exhaustion did not explain the tremors that came in waves, growing worse each day. It did not explain the strange discoloration creeping along his fingertips, or the way his usually sharp mind sometimes drifted mid-sentence, forgetting words he had known his whole life. Elena was a healer, one of the youngest ever to be trained under Elias Grant, but she was also something else within the pack, something she had never spoken about out loud. She was the king's closest confidant, not his mate, not officially, not with any binding or ceremony, but something had grown between them over the past 2 years, that neither of them had ever put a name to. Late-night conversations in the library, walks along the eastern ridge when the moon was full, and neither of them wanted to be near the noise of the pack halls. He trusted her with things he told no one else, including his doubts about his own brother. Now he lay dying, and she was the only one in the room who seemed to actually care. "His pulse is weakening," Elias muttered, laying a hand flat against Damien's chest. "Elena, hand me the silver vial from the second shelf, the one sealed with red wax." She retrieved it instantly, her hands steady even as her heart pounded. Elias uncorked the vial, and let 3 drops fall onto Damien's tongue. The king's breathing slowed, deepened, became less ragged. It was not a cure, Elena knew that much. It was a way of buying time, nothing more. "What is happening to him?" she asked quietly, once the immediate crisis had passed, and Damien's chest was rising and falling in a steadier rhythm. Elias did not answer right away. He wiped his hands on a cloth, his movements slow and deliberate, the way they always were when he was choosing his words carefully. "I do not believe this is a natural illness," he said finally. Elena's stomach turned to ice. "You think someone did this to him?" "I think," Elias said, lowering his voice until it was barely audible, "that we should be very careful about who we say that to." Before Elena could respond, the heavy wooden doors of the chamber swung open, and Counselor Ronan Ashgrove walked in, as though he already owned the room. He was Damien's younger brother by 4 years, tall and broad-shouldered in the way all the Ashgrove men were, but where Damien's presence commanded respect, Ronan's commanded caution. There was a coldness behind his eyes that had unsettled Elena from the very first time they met. "I heard the screaming from the east wing," Ronan said, his gaze sweeping over his brother's unconscious form without any visible emotion. "Is he stable?" "For now," Elias answered carefully. Ronan nodded slowly, as if this news required deep consideration. "The elders are asking questions. They want to know why the Alpha King has not been seen in council for 11 days. They want to know who is truly running this pack while he lies here. He is still your king, Elena said before she could stop herself. He is still breathing. Ronan's eyes shifted to her, and something in his expression sharpened, like a blade being drawn slowly from its sheath. And who exactly are you to speak on matters of pack leadership, healer? The way he said the word healer made it sound like an insult. She has been assisting me with his care, Elias said quickly, stepping slightly in front of Elena. Her knowledge of restorative herbs has kept him alive this long. How touching, Ronan said, though his tone suggested he found nothing touching about it at all. Regardless, I will be informing the council that my brother remains incapacitated. Someone must maintain order while he recovers. Or while he does not, Elena said quietly. The words slipped out before she could catch them, and she immediately regretted the way Ronan's head turned toward her, slow and precise. Careful, he said, his voice soft in a way that felt far more dangerous than shouting would have. Grief makes people say foolish things. I would hate for anyone to think you were suggesting my brother's condition benefits me in some way. Elena said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. Ronan turned and left, as quietly as he had entered, and the moment the doors shut behind him, Elias exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding the entire time. You need to be more careful, he said, turning to Elena. He is not a man who forgives being questioned, especially not by someone of your rank. Something is wrong here, Elias. You said it yourself. This is not a natural illness, and Ronan walks in here more concerned about council meetings than his own brother's life. I know, Elias said, and for the first time, Elena saw real fear in the old healer's eyes. But knowing something, and being able to prove it, are very different things. Until we understand what is truly happening to him, we must tread carefully, very carefully. Elena looked back at Damien, still and pale against the white sheets, his chest rising and falling with a fragility that terrified her more than any threat Ronan could make. She thought of the way his eyes had found hers in that single moment of consciousness, the way he had said her name as though it was the only thing anchoring him to the world. She did not know what was happening to him. She did not know who was responsible, or what Ronan truly wanted, or how deep this darkness went. But she knew one thing, with absolute certainty, as she stood there in that quiet, tense room. She was not going to let him die without a fight. Over the following days, Elena barely left the healing chamber. She catalogued every symptom, every change in his condition, comparing it against every text Elias owned, and several he had to borrow from healers in neighboring territories. The discoloration in his fingertips was spreading slowly toward his wrists. His fevers came in cycles, always worse at night, always accompanied by confusion and disorientation that frightened her more than the physical symptoms ever could. She began to suspect poison almost immediately, though she kept the thought to herself at first, unwilling to voice something so dangerous without proof. But the pattern was too consistent, too deliberate, to be anything natural. Real illnesses did not wax and wane with such precision. They did not seem to target a body's strength so methodically, weakening him just enough to keep him alive, but never enough to let him recover. Someone wanted him weak. Not dead, weak. The realization sat like a stone in her chest. She tried to speak with Damien during his brief moments of clarity, desperate for any information that might help her understand what had happened at the Ironwood summit, what he might have eaten or drunk that no one else had. But his memories from those days were fragmented, slipping away from him even as he tried to grasp them. There was a toast, he told her one evening, his voice weak but steady enough to form full sentences. Before the final agreements were signed, Ronan proposed it himself, said it was tradition among the border packs. I do not remember much after that. Elena's blood ran cold. Ronan gave you the drink? Damien's brow furrowed, as if trying to force his mind through fog. I believe so, though I cannot be certain. Everything from that night feels distant, wrong. Before Elena could press further, exhaustion pulled him back under, his eyes closing, his breathing slowing, into the shallow rhythm of forced sleep. She sat beside him for a long time afterward, turning his words over and over in her mind, weighing the terrible possibility against everything she thought she knew about the pack, about loyalty, about family. She did not want to believe that Ronan could do such a thing to his own brother, but she had seen the way he looked at Damien in that chamber, the calculation behind his concern, the ease with which he spoke of council meetings while his brother's life hung in the balance. 2 nights later, everything changed. Elena was returning from the herb gardens near the eastern wall, her arms full of moonflower stems needed for a new tincture, when she noticed a group of guards approaching from across the courtyard. Something in their posture made her pause. They walked with too much purpose, too much formality, for a routine patrol. Elena Voss, the lead guard said as they stopped in front of her. His name was Callum, and he had always treated her with quiet respect during her years serving the pack. But tonight, his expression was carefully blank, the look of a man following orders he did not agree with, but dared not question. "Callum, what is this about?" "By order of Councillor Ronan, acting head of the Pack Council, you are to leave Ashgrove territory before sundown tomorrow." The moonflower stems slipped from her arms. "What? On what grounds?" "You have been accused of unauthorized closeness to the Alpha King during a period of vulnerability. The Council views this as a serious breach of conduct." "That is absurd," Elena said, her voice rising, despite every instinct telling her to remain calm. "I have done nothing but try to save his life. Elias can confirm everything I have done in that chamber has been in service of his recovery." "The elder healer's testimony has already been considered," Callum said, and something in his eyes suggested he did not fully believe the words leaving his own mouth. "The decision has been made. I am sorry, Elena. I truly am. But I have my orders." Elena felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. "Let me see him. Let me say goodbye at least." "That will not be possible." "Callum, please." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might relent. But then his expression closed off completely, and he stepped back, gesturing for the other guards to escort her toward the outer gate. "I am sorry," he said again, quieter this time, truly. They did not give her time to gather her belongings, did not give her time to see Elias, did not give her a single moment to reach the healing chamber, where Damien still lay fighting for his life. She was walked directly to the northern border, given nothing but a travel cloak and a small pouch of coin that felt more like an insult than a kindness, and left standing at the edge of the territory as the gates closed behind her with a heavy, final sound. The last thing she saw before the guards turned and walked away was the distant silhouette of the healing chamber's tower, its single lit window glowing faintly against the darkening sky. Somewhere behind that window, the man she loved lay dying, and she had no way to reach him. Elena stood at the border for a long time after the guards disappeared, unable to make herself move, unable to fully process what had just happened. 3 weeks ago, her life had made sense. She had a purpose, a place, a person who trusted her with the truth, even when he trusted almost no one else. Now she stood alone in the cold, with nothing but questions and a growing, terrible suspicion that Ronan's ambitions ran far deeper than anyone in the pack had dared to imagine. She thought of Damien's words about the toast, about the fog that swallowed his memory afterward. She thought of Ronan's calm, calculating eyes as he stood over his dying brother's bed, more concerned with council meetings than compassion. She thought of Callum's reluctant apology, the way even the guards seemed to sense something was deeply wrong, even if none of them dared say it aloud. Someone was orchestrating all of this, the poisoning, the isolation, her sudden banishment. It was too precise, too convenient, to be anything but deliberate. As she finally turned and began walking into the darkness beyond the border, one thought settled into her chest with unshakable certainty. This was not over, not by far. Whatever Ronan was planning, whatever web he was weaving around his brother's failing body, Elena would find a way back. She did not know how yet, and she did not know how long it would take. But she knew, with a conviction that steadied her shaking hands and quickened her tired steps, that she was not finished fighting for Damien Ashgrove. Not even close. Behind her, the lights of Ashgrove territory grew smaller with every step, until the darkness of the unfamiliar road ahead swallowed them completely. Elena Voss walked forward into the unknown, carrying nothing but a cloak, a small pouch of coin, and a promise she had made to herself in the silence of that terrible night. She would return. And when she did, the truth would return with her. The road away from Ashgrove territory was colder than Elena remembered any road being. She walked through the night without stopping, too shaken to feel the chill properly, too consumed by anger and fear to notice how far she had traveled, until the sun began to rise over unfamiliar hills. By the time she finally allowed herself to rest, collapsing beneath a wide oak tree just off the main road, her legs ached, and her mind was a storm of unanswered questions. Why now? Why so suddenly, and with so little explanation? She turned the accusation over in her head again and again. Unauthorized closeness to the Alpha King during a period of vulnerability. It was a vague enough charge that no one could argue against it, and specific enough to sound official when read aloud to a frightened, uncertain council. It was, Elena realized with growing dread, exactly the kind of accusation a man would invent if he needed to remove someone quickly, without giving them any real chance to defend themselves. Ronan had not banished her because she had done anything wrong. He had banished her because she was a threat. The thought settled cold and heavy in her stomach. If Ronan was responsible for Damien's illness, then Elena, who had spent every day at his bedside studying his symptoms, questioning his memories, connecting pieces that no one else seemed willing to connect, was the one person capable of exposing him. Removing her was not cruelty for its own sake, it was strategy. She forced herself to her feet and kept walking. By midday, she reached the outskirts of a town she did not recognize, a cluster of wooden buildings and dirt roads that marked the edge of a rogue settlement, territory that belonged to no official pack. It was the kind of place healers like her had been warned about growing up, filled with wolves who had left their packs for one reason or another, some by choice and some by force. Elena had never imagined she would become one of them. She found a small inn near the center of town, its sign faded and peeling, and used a portion of her limited coin to secure a room for a few nights. The innkeeper, a stout woman named Greta with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, did not ask questions about why a healer with fine traveling clothes and empty hands had arrived alone, with no pack insignia to speak of. "Plenty of folks come through here running from something," Greta said simply, handing over a key. "Long as you pay your coin and keep to yourself, I don't need your story." Elena thanked her and retreated to the small room upstairs, where she sat on the edge of a narrow bed and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened. She thought of Damien's hand gripping the sheets during his convulsions. She thought of his eyes finding hers in that single moment of clarity, the way he had said her name like it meant something. She thought of Elias, left alone now to care for a dying king, with no one to help him piece together the truth. She did not cry. She had never been someone who cried easily, and something about the enormity of the situation made tears feel almost beside the point. Instead, she sat very still, breathing slowly, and began to think. If she could not return to Ashgrove territory yet, she needed information. She needed to understand what kind of poison could produce Damien's symptoms, something that mimicked illness closely enough to fool most healers, but left the subtle signs she had noticed, the discoloration, the memory fog, the cyclical fevers. If she could identify the poison, she might be able to identify who had access to it, and that could lead her back to the truth. Over the following days, Elena began quietly building a new life in the rogue settlement, though every part of her ached to be somewhere else. She offered her services as a healer to the local community, treating minor injuries and illnesses in exchange for food, coin, and most importantly, access to the town's modest collection of medical texts. She kept her past carefully hidden, telling no one about the pack she had come from, or the king she had left behind. It was not easy. The rogue settlement had little in the way of formal training or resources compared to what she was used to, and she often found herself working with far less than she needed. But it gave her purpose, and purpose was the only thing keeping her from unraveling completely. She thought of Damien every single day. Sometimes it was a fleeting memory, the sound of his laugh during one of their late-night conversations in the library, or the particular way he furrowed his brow when he was concentrating on pack matters that troubled him. Other times the thoughts came more painfully, images of him convulsing on that bed, his skin too pale, his breathing too shallow. She wondered if he was even still alive. The uncertainty was its own kind of suffering, worse in some ways than grief itself, because grief, at least, came with an ending. This was an open wound that refused to close, a question that followed her through every waking hour and haunted the edges of her sleep. 3 weeks into her exile, Elena finally found something useful. An elderly healer passing through the settlement, a traveling man named Ferris, who had spent decades studying rare toxins used in old pack conflicts, mentioned a substance during a casual conversation that made Elena's entire body go still. "There is an old poison," he said, unaware of the significance his words held for her, "used centuries ago during territorial disputes. Slow-acting, difficult to detect. It mimics a wasting illness. Fevers that come and go, confusion, discoloration in the extremities, as the body struggles to process it. Most healers mistake it for a natural affliction because the symptoms build so gradually. Is there a name for it? Elena asked, trying and failing to keep her voice steady. Ferris nodded, taking a slow sip of the tea Elena had prepared for him. The old texts call it widow's whisper. Rare now, thankfully, since most packs banned its use generations ago. Difficult to obtain unless you know exactly where to look. Elena's mind raced. Widow's whisper. A poison rare enough that very few people would even know it existed, let alone have access to it. Would you happen to know, she asked carefully, who might still deal in such a substance? Ferris's expression shifted, curiosity flickering behind his eyes as he studied her more closely. That is an unusual question for a healer to ask. May I ask why you want to know? Elena hesitated only a moment before deciding that honesty, carefully measured, might be her best path forward. I once treated someone with symptoms very similar to what you described. I always suspected something was wrong, but I could never prove it. Ferris studied her for a long moment, something thoughtful passing behind his weathered eyes. There are old smugglers along the western trade routes who still deal in banned substances for the right price. If someone wanted Widow's Whisper badly enough and had enough coin or influence to spend, they could likely find it there. The western trade routes. Elena filed the information away carefully, her mind already working through the implications. If Ronan had obtained the poison through those routes, there might be a record somewhere, a trail she could follow. For the first time since her banishment, Elena felt something other than grief and fear settle into her chest. It was small, fragile, but unmistakable. Hope. That night, she lay awake in her small rented room, staring at the cracked ceiling above her bed, turning the pieces over in her mind. Widow's Whisper, Western trade routes, Ronan's calm, calculating presence at Damien's bedside. The way Callum had seemed almost apologetic when he escorted her from the territory, as though even the guards sensed something was deeply wrong, but felt powerless to act against it. She thought about Elias, still trapped in that healing chamber, likely watching Damien's condition worsen, with no one left to help him piece together the truth. She wondered if he had discovered anything new in her absence, or if Ronan's grip on the pack had tightened even further, cutting off any remaining resistance. She needed to find a way to communicate with him, discreetly, without drawing attention that might put either of them in further danger. But how? She had no messengers she could trust, no safe way to send word back into territory she had been explicitly forbidden from entering. An idea began to form slowly, cautious and uncertain, but growing stronger the longer she considered it. Elias sometimes traveled to nearby settlements to gather rare herbs unavailable within packlands, a practice Elena remembered well from her early years of training under him. If she could learn his usual travel patterns, she might be able to intercept him during one of these trips, somewhere far enough from Ashgrove territory that neither of them would be at risk of being seen together. It was a fragile plan, built on assumptions and old memories that might no longer hold true. But it was something, and something was infinitely better than the helpless waiting that had consumed her since the night of her banishment. Over the following days, Elena quietly gathered information from travelers passing through the rogue settlement, listening carefully to any news that drifted in from Ashgrove territory. Most of it was vague, second-hand rumors filtered through several retellings before reaching her ears, but she pieced together what she could. The Alpha King remained unwell, though details on his exact condition were scarce. Counselor Ronan had taken on increasing responsibility within the Pack Council, a development some travelers described as reassuring stability during a difficult time, while others spoke of it with a note of unease they seemed reluctant to fully voice. Elena noticed the pattern immediately. Those who praised Ronan's leadership tended to be recent arrivals to the pack, wolves who had joined Ashgrove territory within the past year or two under his direct sponsorship. Those who spoke with hesitation, who chose their words carefully and glanced around before speaking at all, tended to be older members of the pack, wolves who had known Damien since childhood and clearly held a different, quieter opinion of his brother's growing influence. It was a subtle but telling division, one Elena suspected Ronan had been cultivating deliberately over recent months, perhaps even longer. She began drafting a plan in her mind, piece by careful piece. She would need to learn more about Elias's travel patterns. She would need to find a safe way to communicate with him without endangering either of their lives. And most importantly, she would need proof, something concrete enough to bring before the pack council that could not be dismissed or explained away by Ronan's careful manipulations. It would not be easy. It would likely take weeks, perhaps months, and every day that passed carried the terrible risk that Damien's condition would worsen beyond recovery before she could act. But Elena had made a promise to herself on that cold night at the border, and she intended to keep it. As the settlement quieted around her and the moon rose high above the rooftops, Elena sat by her small window, watching the distant horizon in the direction of Ashgrove territory, and allowed herself, just for a moment, to hope that somewhere beyond that horizon, Damien was still fighting, still holding on, waiting, even if he did not know it yet, for her to find her way back to him. 6 weeks passed before Elena finally found the opening she had been waiting for. She learned, through careful and patient conversation with traveling merchants who passed through the rogue settlement, that Elias Grant made regular trips to a small market town called Hollowmere, roughly 2 days' journey from Ashgrove territory, where he purchased rare herbs unavailable within packlands. He traveled there once every full moon cycle, always alone, always taking the same quiet route along the river road. Elena spent 3 days traveling to Hollowmere herself, arriving early, and finding a quiet corner near the herb stalls where she could watch without being seen. She wore a plain cloak, with the hood drawn low, nothing that would mark her as anything other than an ordinary traveler passing through. When Elias finally arrived on the appointed day, moving slowly between the stalls with a woven basket over one arm, Elena felt her heart lift with a relief so sharp it nearly brought tears to her eyes. He looked older than she remembered, his shoulders more stooped, deep lines of worry etched into his weathered face. But he was alive, and he was here, and that meant there was still a chance. She waited until he moved toward a quieter section of the market, away from the busiest stalls, before approaching him from behind. Elias. He froze at the sound of her voice, his basket nearly slipping from his grip. When he turned and saw her standing there, his expression shifted through shock, disbelief, and finally, something close to desperate relief. "Elena," he breathed, glancing around quickly to make sure no one was watching them too closely. "You should not be here. If anyone recognizes you, if word reaches Ronan." "I need to know," she said, cutting him off gently but firmly. "Is he alive?" Elias's face softened with a sorrow that made Elena's stomach twist. "He is alive. Barely. His condition has not improved since you left. If anything, it has grown worse." The words hit her like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain steady. "I have information that might help. I believe I know what is being used against him." She quickly explained everything she had learned. The poison called Widow's Whisper, its slow and deliberate symptoms, the Western trade routes where such a rare and banned substance might still be obtained. Elias listened with growing alarm, his hands tightening around the handle of his basket as she spoke. "That would explain a great deal," he said quietly once she finished. "I have suspected poison for weeks now, but I could never identify the source." "If you are right, this changes everything. Has anything changed within the pack since I left?" Elena asked. "Anything at all?" Elias hesitated, glancing around them once more, before lowering his voice further. "Ronan has consolidated significant power. He has replaced several of the older council members with wolves loyal directly to him. Callum, the guard who escorted you from the territory, was quietly demoted last week. I believe he expressed concerns about your banishment to the wrong people." Elena's chest tightened with guilt. "This is because of me." "No," Elias said firmly. "This is because of Ronan's ambition. You are simply an obstacle he chose to remove along the way. Do not carry guilt that belongs to him alone." Elena nodded, though the guilt lingered regardless. "I need proof, Elias. Proof of the poison. Proof of who administered it. Proof strong enough that the council cannot simply dismiss it or bury it the way they have buried everything else." "That will not be easy," Elias said. "Ronan controls nearly everyone with access to Damien now. I am one of the few he has not yet removed, likely because he still needs a healer present to maintain the appearance of proper care." "Then you are our way in," Elena said, an idea beginning to form. "If Widow's Whisper is being administered regularly, there may be physical evidence, residue, in whatever substance he receives it through. Food, drink, medicine. If you can identify how it is being delivered, and preserve even a small sample, it could be enough to prove deliberate poisoning." Elias considered this carefully, his healer's mind clearly working through the logistics. It would be dangerous. If Ronan discovers I am investigating along these lines, he will remove me from the chamber entirely, and Damien will be left with no one who genuinely wishes him to survive. I know the risk, Elena said, but if we do nothing, he dies regardless, and Ronan takes the pack. Elias was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant with thought. Finally he nodded, slowly and deliberately. I will do what I can, carefully. It may take time to gather anything conclusive without drawing suspicion. I understand. I will return to this market every full moon, on this same day. If you have anything to share, leave word with the herb merchant at the northern stall, a woman named Priya. I have already spoken with her. She has agreed to hold messages discreetly for a fair price. Elias raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something like pride passing through his tired expression. You have been busy. I have had little else to occupy my time, Elena said, a faint, humorless smile touching her lips. They spoke for a few more minutes, exchanging what small details they could, before the risk of being noticed together grew too great. Before Elias turned to leave, he reached out and gently touched Elena's arm, his expression grave. He asks for you, you know. In his more lucid moments, before the fevers take him again, he asks where you have gone, why you left without saying goodbye. Elena's throat tightened painfully. What do you tell him? The truth, mostly. That you were sent away, and that I do not fully understand why. I have not told him about Ronan's involvement, not yet. I do not want to give him something to fight for that might put him in greater danger if Ronan suspects he knows too much. Elena nodded, understanding the caution even as it pained her deeply. Tell him I have not abandoned him. Tell him I am coming back. I will find a way, Elias promised. He turned and disappeared into the crowded market, and Elena remained standing there for a long moment, watching the space where he had been, feeling something steadier settle into her chest, despite everything. She was not powerless. She had allies, however few. She had a plan, however fragile, and somewhere beyond the horizon, Damien was still asking for her, still holding on to whatever thread of hope remained between them. She returned to the rogue settlement with renewed purpose, throwing herself into research with an intensity that left little room for despair. She spent every spare hour poring over Ferris's old texts on rare toxins, learning everything she could about Widow's Whisper, its properties, its typical methods of administration, and crucially, any known treatments or antidotes that might counteract its effects. The news on that front was not encouraging. Most of the old texts agreed that once Widow's Whisper had been administered over an extended period, the damage it caused to the body's internal systems became increasingly difficult to reverse. There were treatments that could slow its progression, even temporarily halt it if caught early enough, but nothing that promised a full and certain recovery once the poisoning had continued for as long as Damien's apparently had. Elena refused to let this discourage her. She began compiling a list of restorative herbs and treatments that might help stabilize Damien's condition once the source of the poison was removed, cross-referencing everything against Elias's notes on his current symptoms. If they could identify and stop the poisoning, and pair that with an aggressive restorative treatment, there was still a chance, however narrow, that he could recover. A month later, at their agreed meeting point in Hollowmere, Elena found a message waiting for her with Priya, the herb merchant, written in Elias's careful, cramped handwriting. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the small parchment. The message was brief, but its contents made her blood run cold. The poison is delivered through his evening tea, prepared personally by Ronan's chosen attendant. I have collected a sample. Meet me at the usual place. Time grows short. His condition has worsened significantly in the past week. Elena read the message 3 times, before folding it carefully and tucking it into the inner pocket of her cloak. Her heart pounded with a mixture of vindication and terror. They had proof, or the beginnings of proof. But time was running out faster than she had feared. She began preparing immediately for the journey back to Hollowmere, gathering her notes, her herbs, everything she had compiled over the past 2 months of careful, patient investigation. Whatever came next, whatever risks lay ahead, Elena knew with absolute certainty that the time for careful, distant planning was rapidly coming to an end. The next time she saw Elias, they would need more than just a plan. They would need to act. The journey back to Hollowmere felt longer than any road Elena had traveled before, though in truth it took no more time than her previous trips. Every mile felt weighted with urgency. Every hour that passed a reminder that Damien's condition had worsened significantly, that the window for saving him might be closing faster than she could act. She arrived a full day before their agreed meeting time, unable to sit still in the rogue settlement any longer, and spent the extra hours pacing near the herb stalls, watching the road for any sign of Elias's familiar figure. When he finally appeared, moving more quickly than his usual measured pace, Elena's stomach dropped at the sight of his face. He looked exhausted, worn thin by worry, in a way that frightened her more than his message had. "You look terrible," she said as he reached her, though her tone carried no judgment, only concern. "I have not slept properly in days," Elias admitted, guiding her toward a quieter corner away from the market crowds. "Ronan has increased his presence in the healing chamber. I believe he suspects something, though I do not know what exactly he suspects." Elena's chest tightened. "Do you think he knows about the sample you collected?" "I do not believe so, not yet. But he watches me more closely now, asks more questions about Damien's treatment than he ever did before. I fear my window for gathering further evidence is closing quickly." "Show me what you have," Elena said. Elias reached into his cloak and produced a small, carefully sealed vial containing a dark, faintly discolored liquid. Elena took it with trembling hands, holding it up to catch the afternoon light filtering through the market stalls. "This is from his evening tea?" "Yes. I intercepted a portion before it reached him 3 nights ago, replacing it with a harmless substitute so the attendant would not notice anything amiss. I have not yet had the opportunity to test it properly against the descriptions in the old texts, but the color and consistency match what you described." Elena carefully tucked the vial into a protected pouch within her cloak, her mind already racing through the tests she would need to run to confirm its contents. "I will analyze this immediately once I return to the settlement. If it confirms Widow's Whisper, we will have physical proof, something the council cannot simply dismiss as rumor or speculation." "And then what?" Elias asked, his voice heavy with the weight of the question. "Even with proof, bringing an accusation against Ronan will not be simple. He controls much of the council now. Many of them owe their positions directly to him. Presenting evidence of his guilt could easily be turned around, twisted into an accusation against us instead." Elena had considered this problem extensively during her long nights of research and planning. "We need more than just proof of poisoning. We need proof that directly implicates Ronan, not just his attendant. Otherwise, he will simply claim ignorance, perhaps even sacrifice the attendant to protect himself." "That attendant is fiercely loyal to him," Elias said. "I doubt they would turn against him easily, even facing consequences." "Then we need another way in," Elena said, thinking aloud. "Someone within the council who might be persuaded to help us. Someone who has grown uneasy about Ronan's growing power, but has not yet found the courage or the evidence to act against him." Elias considered this for a long moment. "There is one possibility. Councilwoman Isolde. She served alongside Damien's father for decades before he passed, and she has never fully trusted Ronan, even before all of this began. I have noticed her growing quieter in recent council sessions, more withdrawn. I believe she has doubts, though she has been careful never to voice them openly. Do you think she could be trusted with what we know? I do not know for certain, but she may be our best option. If we can bring her the evidence privately, perhaps she will find the courage to help us bring it before the full council, in a way that carries real weight." Elena nodded slowly, turning the plan over in her mind. It was risky, built on assumptions about a woman she had never met, but Elias's judgment had proven reliable, time and again over the years, and she trusted his read on the political currents within the pack, far more than her own distant guesses. "How is he?" Elena asked quietly, unable to hold the question back any longer. "Truly, tell me everything." Elias's expression grew heavier. "The fevers have grown more frequent, and they last longer each time. His moments of clarity have become rare, sometimes only a few minutes at a time, before the confusion returns. He has lost considerable weight. I fear his body is beginning to lose the strength it needs to keep fighting." Tears pricked at the corners of Elena's eyes, but she forced them back, refusing to let despair take root when there was still work to be done. "How much time do you think we have?" "I cannot say with certainty. Weeks, perhaps. Possibly less, if his condition continues to decline at this rate. I am doing everything within my power to slow the progression, but without addressing the source, my efforts can only buy so much time." Then we cannot afford to waste any more of it, Elena said, steel entering her voice. I will test this sample tonight. If it confirms what we suspect, I will find a way to reach Councilwoman Isolde, even if it means risking discovery. Elena, Elias said, his voice suddenly urgent. You cannot return to Ashgrove territory yourself. If you are seen, if Ronan learns you have returned, he may act far more drastically than simple banishment. I do not trust what he might do if he feels truly cornered. I know the risk, Elena said, but I did not spend 2 months building a case against him, just to remain safely hidden while Damien dies. I will be careful. I will not act recklessly, but I will not stay away forever, waiting for permission that will never come. Elias studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted from concern to a kind of resigned respect. You have not changed, even after everything that has happened. Some things should not change, Elena said quietly. They spent another hour together, refining their plan, discussing how best to approach Councilwoman Isolde without drawing unwanted attention, and identifying a series of signals they could use to communicate safely going forward. Small marks left with Priya the herb merchant, coded phrases that would mean nothing to an outside observer, but carried clear meaning between the two of them. Before they parted ways, Elias pressed something small into Elena's hand, a folded piece of parchment sealed with wax. I did not want to give this to you until I was certain you would not act rashly upon reading it. It is from Damien. He dictated it to me during one of his clearer moments, insisted I find a way to get it to you if I ever saw you again. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers closed carefully around the small, precious object as though it might disappear if she held it too loosely. Read it once you are somewhere safe, Elias said gently. It will only make the road ahead harder if you read it here. Elena nodded, tucking the letter carefully alongside the poison sample within her cloak, treasuring both in equal measure though, for very different reasons. The journey back to the rogue settlement passed in a blur, Elena's mind consumed by everything Elias had told her, by the terrible weight of the timeline now pressing against every plan she made. She tested the sample the moment she reached her small rented room, comparing its properties carefully against everything Ferris's old texts had described. The results left no room for doubt. Widow's whisper. Confirmed, undeniable, exactly as she had suspected. She sat for a long time afterward, staring at the small vial in the dim candlelight, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and dread settle over her. They had proof now, real physical evidence that could not be easily dismissed or explained away, but proof alone would not be enough. She still needed a path to bring it before the council, in a way that could not be silenced or buried by Ronan's growing influence. Only then, once the practical matters had been carefully considered and organized in her mind, did Elena finally allow herself to unfold the small parchment letter, her hands trembling as she read Damien's words for the first time. The letter was short, his usually elegant handwriting rendered shaky and uneven, clearly written during a period of significant physical struggle. But the words themselves were unmistakably his, carrying the same quiet strength and warmth she remembered from countless conversations in the palace library. Elena, I do not know if this letter will ever find you, or if I will still be here when it does. I do not know what happened the night you were sent away, only that I woke to find you gone, and no one would give me a straight answer as to why. I have suspected for some time now that something is deeply wrong, though the fog in my mind makes it difficult to hold on to any single thought for long. Whatever happens to me, know that I never wished for your absence, and that if there is any way back to me, I hope with everything I have left, that you will find it. You have always been the steadiest thing in my life, and I find myself needing that steadiness now more than ever. Elena pressed the letter against her chest, closing her eyes as the tears she had held back for so long finally began to fall. Whatever it cost her, whatever risks lay ahead, she was going back. Reaching Councilwoman Isolde proved far more difficult than Elena had anticipated. The older woman rarely left the protected inner circle of Ashgrove territory, and her schedule, as far as Elias could observe from his limited vantage point within the healing chamber, offered few opportunities for a private, unobserved conversation. Weeks passed with no viable opening, each day adding another layer of anxiety to Elena's already strained nerves. She used the time as productively as she could, refining her restorative treatments, gathering rare herbs known to counteract the lingering effects of slow-acting poisons, preparing everything she might need, the moment an opportunity finally presented itself. Ferris, the traveling healer who had first told her about Widow's Whisper, proved an unexpected ally during this period, offering guidance on treatments he had read about in old texts that even Elena had not yet encountered. If the poisoning is stopped in time, he told her during one of their long conversations in the settlement's modest herb garden, the body can often recover, though it may take considerable time and rest. The key difficulty lies in identifying and removing the ongoing source before permanent damage sets in. How would we know if the damage has already become permanent? Elena asked, unable to keep the fear from her voice. Ferris considered the question carefully. Persistent confusion beyond the immediate fever episodes would be a troubling sign, as would any lasting weakness in the limbs once the fevers subside. But healers have seen recoveries even from advanced cases, particularly in strong, otherwise healthy individuals. There is reason for hope, provided action comes soon enough. Elena clung to that hope through the following weeks, even as messages from Elias, carefully passed through Priya at the market stalls, grew increasingly worried in tone. Damien's episodes were lasting longer. His moments of clarity were growing rarer and briefer. Finally, nearly 6 weeks after their last meeting in Hollowmere, Elias sent word of an opportunity. Councilwoman Isolde would be traveling to a neighboring territory for a formal diplomatic gathering, a journey that would take her along a quiet stretch of road far from Ashgrove's watchful borders. If Elena could position herself along that route, she might finally have the chance for a private conversation. Elena spent 3 days traveling to intercept the councilwoman's expected path, her nerves stretched thin with anticipation, and fear in equal measure. When Isolde's modest traveling party finally came into view along the quiet forest road, Elena stepped out from the tree line, her hands raised to show she carried no weapon, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the entire party could hear it. The guards accompanying Isolde immediately moved to intercept her, but the older woman raised a hand, studying Elena with sharp, assessing eyes. "I know you," Isolde said slowly. "You are the healer who was banished." "Elena, was it not?" "Yes," Elena said, keeping her voice steady despite the tension coiling through her body. "I apologize for approaching you this way, but I did not know of any safer method. I need to speak with you about the Alpha King's condition. It is a matter of great urgency." Isolde studied her for a long moment, something calculating passing behind her eyes. Finally she turned to her guards. "Give us a moment of privacy. Stay within sight, but out of hearing range." The guards hesitated but obeyed, retreating a short distance while remaining visibly alert. Isolde stepped closer to Elena, lowering her voice. "Speak quickly. I do not have long before questions will be asked about this delay." Elena did not waste the opportunity. She explained everything as concisely as she could, the strange progression of Damien's illness, her suspicions about deliberate poisoning, the confirmation of Widow's Whisper found in his evening tea, and the troubling pattern of Ronan's consolidation of power throughout the Pack Council. Isolde listened without interrupting, her expression growing steadily more grave as Elena spoke. When Elena finally finished, producing the small sealed vial as physical evidence, the older woman was silent for a long moment, staring at the vial with an unreadable expression. "I have suspected something was deeply wrong for some time now," Isolde finally said, her voice quiet but firm. "Ronan's rapid rise, the sudden replacement of loyal council members, the strange calm with which he discusses his brother's suffering. I had no proof, only instinct, and instinct alone is not enough to challenge a man who has positioned himself so carefully." "Will you help us?" Elena asked, holding her breath. Isolde was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risk clearly visible in the tightness of her expression. "If what you say is true, and this evidence supports it, then Ronan has committed one of the gravest offenses possible within our laws. But accusations of this magnitude cannot be brought carelessly. If we act too quickly, without absolute certainty, he will find a way to turn the accusation back upon us, and we will lose whatever advantage this evidence currently provides." "What do you suggest?" "I have access to resources you do not," Isolde said. "A trusted alchemist within the neighboring territory, who can verify this sample independently, providing testimony that cannot be dismissed as bias from either of us. If the sample is confirmed through an impartial third party, we will have something far stronger to bring before the full council." Elena hesitated, reluctant to part with the precious evidence she and Elias had risked so much to obtain. but she recognized the wisdom in Isolde's suggestion. Evidence verified only by herself and Elias, both of whom had obvious personal stakes in the outcome, would always carry an element of doubt that Ronan could exploit. How long will this verification take? A matter of weeks, if I press the matter with appropriate urgency. We do not have weeks, Elena said, fear sharpening her voice. His condition worsens by the day. I do not know how much time remains. Isolde's expression softened slightly, though her resolve did not waver. I understand the urgency, truly. But acting too hastily could cost us everything, including whatever chance remains of saving him. A failed accusation would not only fail to help Damien, it would place both you and Elias in far greater danger than you currently face, and likely result in even tighter control for Ronan going forward. Elena forced herself to breathe slowly, weighing the terrible calculation before her. Every instinct screamed at her to act immediately, to find some way back into the pack and confront Ronan directly. But she knew, with the clear-eyed rationality that had carried her through months of careful investigation, that reckless action now could destroy everything they had worked to build. Very well, she finally said. Take the sample, but please, move as quickly as you possibly can. Isolde accepted the vial, tucking it carefully into an inner pocket of her traveling cloak. I will do everything within my power. In the meantime, continue gathering whatever additional evidence you can. The more we have, the harder it will be for Ronan to escape accountability. Before returning to her guards, Isolde paused, studying Elena, with an expression that carried something close to sympathy. You have taken enormous risks for him. I hope, for both your sakes, that they prove worthwhile. They will, Elena said, with more conviction than she entirely felt. They must. Isolde nodded once and turned to rejoin her traveling party, leaving Elena standing alone at the edge of the forest road, watching until the group disappeared from view. The following weeks stretched into some of the longest of Elena's life. She continued her careful correspondence with Elias through Priya's market stall, continued refining her restorative treatments, continued gathering whatever small pieces of information she could about Ronan's activities and the shifting political currents within Ashgrove territory. But the waiting itself, the powerlessness of it, gnawed at her more fiercely with each passing day. Elias's messages grew steadily more troubled. Damien's episodes were lasting longer, his moments of clarity growing shorter and more infrequent. Twice, Elias reported episodes so severe he feared the king might not survive the night, only to watch him stabilize just enough to continue the terrible, uncertain cycle. Elena threw herself into preparation, refusing to let despair take hold even as the timeline grew increasingly desperate. She organized every restorative herb she had gathered, calculated dosages and treatment schedules based on everything she and Ferris had learned, prepared herself as thoroughly as possible for the moment, whenever it came, that she would finally be needed at Damien's side once more. That moment arrived sooner than she expected, and in a manner far more urgent than she had anticipated. The message arrived late at night, delivered not through Priya's usual careful channel, but by a breathless young messenger boy who had run nearly the entire distance from Hollowmere, sent directly by Elias, with instructions to find Elena, no matter the hour. The healer said to give you this immediately, the boy gasped, thrusting a folded parchment into her hands, before collapsing onto a nearby bench, chest heaving from exertion. He said it could not wait until morning. Elena's hands shook as she unfolded the parchment, reading Elias's hurried, uneven handwriting by the dim light of a nearby lantern. Ronan has ordered increased restrictions on the healing chamber. Only his own chosen attendants permitted entry beginning tomorrow. I believe he intends to remove me from Damien's care entirely. If this happens, I fear what will follow. You must come, and quickly, whatever the risk. There may not be another opportunity. Elena read the message twice, her heart pounding with a fear so sharp it left her briefly unable to breathe. If Ronan removed Elias from the healing chamber, there would be no one left who genuinely wished to save Damien's life. No one to slow the poison's progression. No one to protect him from whatever final steps Ronan might be planning now that his patience seemed to be running thin. She had no time to wait for Isolde's verification. No time to build the careful, methodical case they had been constructing over the past months. Whatever proof they had gathered would have to be enough, or she would have to find another way entirely. Elena spent the remainder of the night preparing, gathering every restorative herb and treatment she had compiled, along with copies of her notes on Damien's symptoms and the confirmed presence of Widow's Whisper. She wrote a brief but urgent letter to Isolde, explaining the sudden change in circumstances, and paid the exhausted young messenger boy generously to deliver it to the councilwoman's estate at first light. Then, before the sun had fully risen, Elena set out for Ashgrove territory, moving with a speed and determination that left little room for the fear still coiled tightly in her chest. She reached the outer edges of the territory 2 days later, approaching not through the main gates where guards would immediately recognize and likely detain her, but through a lesser-known path along the eastern forest that she remembered from her years of gathering herbs during her original training under Elias. The path was overgrown and rarely used, but it led to a small, forgotten gate near the old healing gardens, one that had not been actively guarded in years. The gate was locked, as she expected, but Elena had come prepared. Using tools she had gathered specifically for this purpose, she worked the old lock with the same careful precision she applied to her herbal treatments, until finally, with a soft click, it gave way. She slipped inside the territory under the cover of early morning mist, moving quickly and quietly through the overgrown paths of the old healing gardens, her heart pounding with every step. She had not set foot on this ground in nearly 4 months, and the familiarity of it, mixed with the danger of her return, created a strange and disorienting sensation that she forced herself to push past. Reaching the healing chamber without detection would be the most dangerous part of her journey. The tower stood near the center of the palace grounds, surrounded by guards and attendants who would recognize her instantly if spotted. Elena had spent considerable time during her preparation, studying the layout of the palace grounds from memory, identifying the quietest paths and the times when guard patrols tended to be lightest. She moved through the shadows of the eastern corridor, her hood drawn low, her steps as silent as she could manage. Twice she was forced to hide, once behind a large storage crate as a pair of guards passed on routine patrol, and once inside a narrow alcove as a group of attendants carried supplies toward the main hall. Each time, her heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give her away. But each time, she remained undetected. Finally, she reached the base of the healing chamber tower, where a small service entrance, rarely used and easily overlooked, provided access to the lower levels. Elena slipped inside, climbing the narrow Sluzhebny stairs as quickly and quietly as she could manage. She found Elias in a small preparation room adjacent to the main healing chamber, sorting through herbs with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion and stress. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment, his face went pale with shock, before flooding with overwhelming relief. "Elena, you came." "Of course I came," she said, moving quickly to embrace him briefly, before pulling back to survey the room. "How is he?" Elias's expression darkened. "Worse. Much worse than my last message conveyed. I did not want to frighten the boy with the full truth, in case the message was intercepted along the way. Tell me everything. His fevers have become nearly constant now, with only brief periods of relief. His moments of clarity have all but disappeared entirely. I fear we are running out of time far more quickly than either of us anticipated." Elena's stomach twisted with dread, but she forced herself to remain focused. "I need to see him." Elias hesitated. "The chamber is watched more closely now. Ronan's attendants rotate through at all hours. If you are seen—" "I know the risk," Elena said, "but I did not come this far to remain hidden in a preparation room while he dies just beyond that door." Elias studied her for a long moment, weighing the danger against the desperate need clearly written across her face. Finally, he nodded, moving toward the door that connected to the main healing chamber. "There is a narrow window, roughly 20 minutes, between attendant rotations. If we move now, we may have enough time." Elena followed him through the door, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, and stepped into the healing chamber for the first time in 4 long months. The sight that greeted her stole the breath from her lungs. Damien lay in the center of the large bed, so thin and pale that for one terrible moment, Elena feared she was too late, that she had arrived, only to find him already gone. But then his chest rose, in a slow, shallow breath, and relief flooded through her so intensely, her knees nearly buckled. She moved quickly to his side, taking his hand in both of hers. His skin felt cold and clammy, far too fragile for the strong, steady presence she remembered from their conversations in the palace library, from their walks along the eastern ridge under the full moon. Damien, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly, despite her best efforts to remain composed. I am here. I came back. For a long moment, there was no response, and Elena's heart clenched painfully with fear that his moments of clarity had truly faded beyond reach. But then, slowly, his eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, before gradually settling on her face. Elena, he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper, cracked and weak in a way that broke her heart. You came back. I told you I would, she said, gently squeezing his hand. I am not going anywhere this time. A faint ghost of a smile touched his lips, though the effort of it seemed to exhaust him. I knew you would find a way. Save your strength, Elena said softly, already reaching for her satchel of restorative herbs. I have treatments that may help slow this. We know what has been happening to you, Damien. We know it is not a natural illness. His eyes, weak but suddenly sharper with understanding, met hers. Ronan. It was not a question. We believe so, yes, Elena said carefully, glancing toward Elias, who stood watch near the door, alert for any sign of approaching attendants. We have evidence, though we need more before we can act with certainty before the council. Damien's grip on her hand tightened slightly, weak but unmistakable. You must be careful. If he suspects, if he knows you have returned. I know the risk, Elena said, but I could not stay away any longer, not while you suffer here. Elias moved quickly from his position at the door, his expression suddenly tense. Elena, we must hurry. I hear footsteps approaching. Elena's heart lurched with panic, but she forced herself to remain calm, quickly administering a small dose of one of her restorative treatments, guiding Damien to swallow the bitter tincture, despite his weakened state. This will help slow the progression, even if only temporarily. I will find a way back to you, I promise. Elena, Damien whispered, his grip on her hand refusing to loosen, even as his strength continued to fade. Do not risk yourself further on my account. If Ronan catches you here, I am not leaving you to die alone in this chamber, Elena said fiercely, cutting him off. Whatever the risk, I intend to see this through. The footsteps outside grew louder, unmistakably approaching. Elias grabbed Elena's arm urgently. We must go now, or we will both be discovered. Elena pressed one final, gentle kiss against Damien's forehead, memorizing the feel of him beneath her lips, the fragile warmth that remained, despite everything working against him. I will return. I promise you that. She allowed Elias to pull her back toward the preparation room, just as the main chamber door began to open, slipping through the narrow service exit, moments before Ronan's attendants entered the room, none the wiser to how close they had come to discovering her presence. Elena's heart continued to pound long after she and Elias had retreated to the relative safety of the lower service corridors, adrenaline and fear mixing with a fierce, unshakable determination that had only grown stronger from seeing Damien again, from hearing him say her name, from feeling his weak but persistent grip on her hand. Whatever it took, however dangerous the path ahead proved to be, Elena was more determined than ever to see this through to the end. Elena remained hidden within the old healing gardens for the following days, sheltering in a small, long-abandoned gardener's cottage that Elias remembered from years past, its location known to almost no one still active within the pack. It was far from comfortable, cold and dusty and barely furnished, but it offered something more valuable than comfort. It offered safety and proximity to Damien, close enough that Elias could bring her updates without risking a lengthy, suspicious absence from his duties. The days that followed were tense beyond anything Elena had experienced during her months of exile. Every sound outside the cottage sent her heart racing. Every distant voice made her freeze, certain she had finally been discovered. But the isolation of the old gardens held, and Elias continued slipping away during his rare free moments to bring her news, herbs, and whatever small comforts he could manage. Ronan grows more paranoid, Elias reported during one such visit, his voice low even within the presumed privacy of the cottage. He has increased security throughout the palace grounds, doubled the guards stationed near the healing chamber. I do not know if this is connected to your return, or simply a natural extension of his growing control, but it makes our situation considerably more dangerous. Has there been any word from Isolde? Elena asked, her hands busy grinding herbs for Damien's next treatment, despite the anxious energy coursing through her. None yet. I fear the verification process may be taking longer than we hoped, or perhaps Ronan's increased vigilance has made it more difficult for her to act freely without drawing suspicion. Elena forced down the frustration rising in her chest. Every day that passed without concrete action felt like another day stolen from whatever time Damien had remaining, but she understood the necessity of patience, however much it grated against her instincts. 3 days after her return to the healing chamber, Elena received word that changed everything. A young kitchen attendant, one of the few remaining pack members Elias still trusted from before Ronan's rise to power, approached him quietly during his rounds with troubling information. She overheard a conversation, Elias reported to Elena that evening, his expression graver than she had seen it in months. Ronan speaking, with his chosen attendant, the one responsible for Damien's evening tea. She could not hear everything clearly, but she caught enough to understand that Ronan believes his brother's condition has not progressed as quickly as he intended. He spoke of needing to, in his words, quicken matters. Elena's blood ran cold. He means to increase the dosage. That is my fear as well, Elias said. If he grows impatient with the slow, methodical approach he has used thus far, he may resort to something far more direct and far more dangerous. The urgency of their situation crystallized sharply in Elena's mind. They no longer had the luxury of waiting for Isolde's careful, methodical verification process. If Ronan intended to accelerate his plan, they needed to act immediately, with whatever evidence and support they currently had available, however incomplete it might be. We need to reach Isolde directly, Elena said. Tonight, if possible. We cannot wait any longer for the verification to complete naturally. That is an enormous risk, Elias said. If we act without complete proof, and Ronan discovers our intentions before we can bring this before the full council. If we wait, Damien may not survive long enough for our careful proof to matter at all, Elena said, cutting him off firmly. I would rather risk everything now than lose him to caution. Elias studied her for a long moment before finally nodding, resignation and determination mixing in his weathered expression. I will send word to Isolde immediately, requesting an urgent private audience. I have a trusted contact among her household staff who can deliver the message discreetly. The message was sent that same night, carrying with it the full weight of everything Elena and Elias had gathered over the past months, along with an urgent request for immediate action, given the troubling new information about Ronan's intentions. Isolde's response came faster than Elena had dared hope, arriving the following evening through the same trusted household contact. The councilwoman had agreed to an emergency private meeting, to be held that very night in a secluded section of the palace gardens rarely frequented after dark. Elena's heart pounded with a mixture of hope and terror as she prepared for the meeting, dressing in dark, unremarkable clothing that would allow her to move through the shadows without drawing attention. Elias would accompany her partway, before returning to the healing chamber to maintain his cover, leaving Elena to complete the final approach alone. The secluded garden section Isolde had chosen was overgrown with old rose bushes and untrimmed hedges, clearly not maintained with the same care as the more formal palace gardens closer to the main halls. Elena arrived slightly early, her nerves stretched taut as she waited in the shadows for the councilwoman to appear. Isolde arrived precisely on time, moving with the careful, measured steps of someone accustomed to navigating dangerous political currents without drawing unwanted attention. She wore a plain traveling cloak rather than her usual formal council attire, her hood drawn low against the cool night air. You should not have come here, Isolde said quietly upon spotting Elena in the shadows, though her tone carried more concern than reproach. If Ronan learns of your presence within the territory, the consequences could be severe for all of us. I understand the risk, Elena said, but we have received troubling information. Ronan intends to accelerate the poisoning. We believe he grows impatient with the current pace, and may resort to a far more dangerous dose. Isolde's expression sharpened with alarm. This changes matters considerably. Where does the verification process currently stand? That is precisely why I needed to speak with you urgently. We cannot wait for the full verification process to complete naturally. If Ronan acts on his impatience, Damien may not survive long enough for our careful timeline to matter. Isolde was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the enormous risks involved in acting without complete certainty. The alchemist has confirmed the presence of Widow's Whisper in the sample you provided. That much, at least, is settled beyond doubt. However, we have not yet gathered sufficient additional evidence to directly implicate Ronan himself, rather than simply his attendant. Perhaps direct implication is no longer our most urgent priority, Elena said, an idea forming rapidly in her mind. Perhaps our most urgent priority is simply stopping the poisoning immediately, protecting Damien's life first, and pursuing the full extent of justice against Ronan afterward, once he is no longer in immediate danger. Isolde considered this shift in strategy carefully. You suggest we bring the confirmed poisoning before the council immediately, even without full proof of Ronan's direct involvement? If we can convince the council that Damien is being deliberately poisoned, regardless of by whom initially, it should be sufficient grounds to remove all current attendants from his care and place him under protection while a full investigation proceeds. That alone would stop the immediate danger, buying us time to gather the remaining evidence needed to fully expose Ronan's role. A slow, thoughtful nod spread across Isolde's face as she turned the strategy over in her mind. That is a reasonable approach, and considerably less risky than a direct accusation against Ronan himself, without complete proof. I can call for an emergency council session on these grounds. Several members remain loyal to Damien's memory of leadership, even if they have grown cautious under Ronan's increasing influence. With confirmed evidence of poisoning, I believe we can secure enough votes to enact protective measures immediately. How quickly can this be arranged? I will call for the session first thing tomorrow morning. Given the confirmed severity of the evidence, I do not believe the council can reasonably delay addressing it, regardless of Ronan's objections. Relief flooded through Elena, though it remained tempered by the knowledge that tomorrow still felt agonizingly far away given everything at stake. Thank you. I do not know how to properly express my gratitude for the risk you are taking on our behalf. Do not thank me yet, Isolde said, her expression grave. Ronan will not accept this challenge quietly. Tomorrow's council session will likely become the most contentious this pack has witnessed in generations. Prepare yourself, and Elias, for whatever backlash may follow, regardless of the outcome. Elena nodded, steeling herself for what was to come. We are prepared. We have been preparing for this moment for months now. Isolde studied her for a long moment, something like genuine respect passing behind her sharp, assessing eyes. Damien is fortunate to have someone willing to risk so much on his behalf. I only hope our efforts prove sufficient to save him. They will have to be, Elena said quietly, more to herself than to the councilwoman standing before her. We have no other choice remaining. As Isolde disappeared back into the shadows of the palace gardens, Elena remained standing alone, amid the overgrown rose bushes, her heart pounding, with a mixture of fear and fragile, determined hope. Tomorrow would bring either salvation or disaster, and there was no way to know for certain which outcome awaited them until the council session itself finally began. She made her way back toward the old gardener's cottage under the cover of darkness, her mind racing through every possible outcome, every argument Ronan might raise in his defense, every way their careful plan could still unravel, despite everything they had sacrificed to bring it this far. Whatever tomorrow held, there was no turning back now. The council chamber had never felt so full of tension as it did the following morning. Elena watched from a hidden alcove near the rear entrance, a position Elias had helped arrange, close enough to observe the proceedings, but concealed enough to avoid immediate detection. Her heart pounded as the council members filed into the grand hall, their expressions ranging from curious to visibly uneasy as they took their seats around the long, polished table. Councilwoman Isolde stood near the head of the table, her posture straight and composed, despite the enormous risk she had taken to call this emergency session. Elena could see the careful calculation behind her calm exterior, the same steady resolve that had convinced Elena to trust her with everything just the night before. Ronan arrived last, moving through the chamber with his usual confident, measured stride, though Elena noticed a slight tightness around his eyes that suggested he had not expected this sudden emergency session, had not been given time to prepare a response. This session was called on short notice, Ronan said, settling into his customary seat with practiced ease. I trust there is sufficient reason for disrupting the council's usual schedule. There is, Isolde said, her voice carrying clearly through the tense silence of the chamber. I have received confirmed evidence that Alpha King Damien has been deliberately poisoned over an extended period, using a rare and banned substance known as Widow's Whisper. A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the assembled council members. Ronan's expression remained carefully controlled, though Elena, watching closely from her hidden vantage point, noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw. "That is a serious accusation," Ronan said, his voice measured and calm. "May I ask the source of this evidence?" A sample was collected from the king's evening tea and independently verified by a trusted alchemist within our neighboring territory, Isolde said. "The results confirm the presence of Widow's Whisper beyond any reasonable doubt." "And who collected this sample?" Ronan pressed, his eyes scanning the room, as though searching for someone specific among the gathered faces. Isolde did not immediately answer, and for a moment, the tension in the room stretched taut enough to feel almost physical. "That detail is not immediately relevant to the matter at hand," Isolde said finally. "What matters is that our Alpha King is being poisoned, and that immediate protective measures must be taken to remove all current attendants from his care, while a full investigation proceeds." "With respect, Councilwoman," Ronan said, his tone carrying just enough edge to suggest genuine irritation beneath his controlled exterior. "Removing all current attendants would leave my brother without proper care during a critical period of his illness. Surely a more measured approach would better serve his interests." "His interests are precisely why immediate action is required," Isolde countered. "If he continues to be poisoned by someone within his current care, every day of delay increases the risk to his life." The council chamber erupted into a flurry of debate, voices rising over one another as members argued various positions, some clearly aligned with Ronan's cautious resistance, others visibly troubled by the implications of deliberate poisoning within the palace's most protected chamber. Elena watched with her heart in her throat, unable to intervene directly, but desperate for the outcome to fall in their favor. She had expected resistance from Ronan, but the sheer skill with which he navigated the accusation, deflecting without directly denying, questioning procedure rather than substance, revealed a political cunning she had perhaps underestimated. "I propose," Ronan said once the chamber's noise had settled somewhat, "that rather than removing all attendants immediately, based on evidence whose collection method remains unexplained, we instead conduct a formal internal investigation, led by the council itself, to determine the truth of this claim before taking such drastic action." Several council members nodded in apparent agreement, and Elena's stomach twisted with dread. A formal internal investigation, controlled largely by council members loyal to Ronan, could easily be manipulated to stall indefinitely, buying him exactly the time he needed to either eliminate the evidence entirely or accelerate his plan before any real consequences could take hold. An internal investigation of this nature typically takes weeks, sometimes months, to conclude properly, Isolde argued, clearly recognizing the same danger Elena had identified. "Given the severity of the evidence already gathered, I do not believe we can afford such a lengthy delay." "And I do not believe we can afford reckless action based on incomplete information," Ronan countered smoothly. "If we remove attendance and disrupt his care unnecessarily, and this evidence proves less conclusive than claimed, we will have caused significant additional harm to my brother's fragile condition for nothing." The debate continued for several more tense minutes, the council seemingly split between Isolde's urgency and Ronan's insistence on caution. Elena felt the momentum of the discussion beginning to slip away from them, Ronan's careful, reasonable-sounding arguments gradually eroding the initial shock and urgency that had greeted Isolde's opening statement. It was in this critical moment, as the vote seemed poised to favor Ronan's delaying tactics, that the chamber's rear doors opened unexpectedly. Elias Grant walked into the council chamber, something in his bearing carrying an authority Elena had rarely seen from the normally reserved old healer. He moved directly toward the center of the room, ignoring the startled glances from council members, unaccustomed to a healer interrupting formal proceedings. "Forgive my intrusion," Elias said, his voice carrying clearly despite its usual gentleness. "But I believe there is information relevant to this discussion that only I currently possess." "Elder Healer Grant," Isolde said, recovering quickly from her surprise. "Please, share what you know." Elias glanced briefly toward Ronan, whose expression had grown noticeably colder at his sudden appearance, before continuing. "I have served as the Alpha King's primary healer throughout his entire illness. During this time, I personally observed a consistent pattern in his symptoms that aligns precisely with the known effects of Widow's Whisper poisoning. I collected the sample referenced by Councilwoman Isolde myself, directly from his evening tea, 3 weeks past." Murmurs rippled through the chamber once more, this time carrying a different quality, the weight of first-hand testimony from a respected and long-serving healer, carrying far more authority than an anonymous, unexplained source. "And who prepares the king's evening tea?" Isolde asked, though Elena suspected she already knew the answer. "An attendant assigned personally by Counselor Ronan," Elias said, his eyes meeting Ronan's directly across the chamber. "The same attendant who has maintained exclusive access to the king's private meals and treatments since shortly after his illness began." The chamber fell into a heavy, charged silence as the implications of Elias's testimony settled over the assembled council members. Ronan's carefully composed expression finally cracked, just slightly, a flash of something sharp and dangerous passing behind his eyes before he regained his practiced calm. "This is a serious accusation to level against my own household staff," Ronan said, his voice tighter than before. "I trust the elder healer has substantial proof beyond mere circumstance before making such claims before this council. I have my direct observations, spanning weeks of careful documentation," Elias said steadily, "and I have the independently verified sample, confirmed by an alchemist, with no personal connection to either myself or the royal family." The debate that followed grew increasingly heated, but the tide had visibly shifted. Elias's direct testimony, combined with the independent verification Isolde had already secured, proved far more difficult for Ronan and his allies to dismiss than the initial, more abstract presentation of evidence. Finally, after nearly an hour of continued debate, Isolde called for a formal vote on immediate protective measures, removing all current attendants from the king's care, and placing him under the direct protection of council-appointed guards, while a full and thorough investigation proceeded. The vote passed by a narrow but decisive margin. Elena watched from her hidden alcove as Ronan's expression shifted into something cold and controlled, a man recalculating his position in real time as the ground beneath his careful plans began to shift unexpectedly. He did not argue further, did not raise his voice in protest, simply nodded stiffly in acceptance of the council's decision, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed the fury simmering just beneath his composed exterior. As the council session began to disperse, Elena allowed herself a small, cautious breath of relief. It was not victory, not yet. Ronan remained free, remained a counselor with considerable influence and resources at his disposal. But Damien was safe, at least for now, protected from the immediate threat that had been slowly killing him for months. It was a beginning, and after everything they had sacrificed to reach this point, a beginning was more than Elena had dared hope for just days before. But as she watched Ronan's cold, calculating gaze sweep briefly across the chamber before he departed, something in his expression sent a chill down her spine. This was far from over. In the days that followed the council's decision, Damien's condition began, slowly and cautiously, to improve. With the poisoned attendant removed and Elias once again given full, unrestricted authority over his care, alongside Elena's careful restorative treatments administered discreetly, under the cover of her now sanctioned presence within the healing chamber, the terrible cycle of fevers and confusion that had plagued him for months finally began to loosen its grip. It was not a swift recovery. Ferris's old texts had warned of exactly this, that a body subjected to prolonged poisoning required considerable time and patience to fully heal, but each day brought small, precious signs of progress. His fevers grew less frequent, less severe. His moments of clarity lengthened, stretching from mere minutes into hours, then into most of his waking day. Elena remained by his side throughout this careful recovery, her official banishment quietly overturned by the council's emergency ruling, though the full political reckoning of everything that had happened still loomed unresolved on the horizon. She spent long hours preparing treatments, monitoring his progress, and slowly, tentatively, rebuilding the closeness that had once existed so naturally between them, before everything had been so violently interrupted. "I remember so little of the past months," Damien admitted to her one quiet evening, sitting up in bed with considerably more strength than he had shown in a very long time. "Fragments, mostly. Your voice, sometimes. The feeling of being unable to hold on to a single thought for more than a few moments." "You do not need to remember all of it," Elena said gently, adjusting the blankets around him with careful, practiced hands. "What matters is that you are healing now." "I remember enough to know what my brother did," Damien said, and something hard and cold entered his voice, a controlled fury that Elena had rarely witnessed from him before. I remember enough to understand the scope of his betrayal. Elena hesitated before responding, choosing her words carefully. The council has not yet reached a final determination on the full extent of his involvement. The investigation continues, but Ronan has proven remarkably skilled at avoiding direct implication. He always was, Damien said quietly. Even as children, he had a talent for arranging matters, so that responsibility never quite settled on his own shoulders. Their conversation was interrupted by Elias entering the chamber, his expression carrying a gravity that immediately drew both their attention. "Forgive the intrusion," Elias said, "but there is news from the council that requires immediate attention." "What has happened?" Elena asked, rising quickly from her seat beside Damien's bed. "Ronan has fled the territory," Elias said. "Sometime during the night, along with several attendants who remained loyal to him, guards discovered his private chambers empty this morning, along with evidence that he had been systematically withdrawing funds and resources from the pack treasury over recent weeks, likely anticipating exactly this outcome." Damien's expression darkened further, though something like grim satisfaction flickered beneath the anger. He always did prefer retreat over facing consequences directly. "There is more," Elias continued, his voice growing more careful. "The investigation into the treasury withdrawals has uncovered additional evidence, correspondence, suggesting Ronan had been planning this course of action for considerably longer than initially suspected. It appears the poisoning was intended not merely to weaken you, but to create sufficient chaos and uncertainty within the pack, that he could eventually claim leadership through what would appear to be a natural, tragic succession, followed by his own carefully arranged departure once his position had been secured." Elena's stomach twisted with a fresh wave of horror at the full scope of the plan finally being revealed. "He intended to let you die, once he had secured enough support and control." "It appears so," Elias confirmed grimly. "The correspondence suggests he grew impatient with the slow pace of your decline, hence the plans to accelerate the dosage that Elena discovered through her contact. Fortunately, the council's intervention came before he could act on that impatience." Damien was quiet for a long moment, processing the full weight of his brother's betrayal. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness that went far beyond his physical illness. "How long had this been planned, do you think?" "Based on the treasury records, likely well over a year," Elias said. "Perhaps longer. The poisoning at the summit appears to have been a carefully chosen opportunity, one that would be difficult to trace back to deliberate action, disguised as a natural consequence of exhaustion and stress from difficult negotiations." The revelation settled heavily over the chamber, the true scope of Ronan's ambition and calculation, far exceeding what any of them had initially suspected. Elena reached for Damien's hand, offering what comfort she could in the face of such a profound betrayal from someone who should have been among his most trusted allies. "What happens now?" Elena asked, looking between Damien and Elias. "With Ronan gone, what becomes of the investigation, the accountability for everything he has done?" "The council has issued a formal decree of exile against him, effective immediately, along with confiscation of any remaining assets connected to his position," Elias said. "Should he ever attempt to return to Ashgrove territory, he will face immediate arrest and formal trial for his crimes." "A fitting consequence," Damien said quietly, "though it feels somehow insufficient, given everything he has cost this pack, everything he nearly took from me." Elena squeezed his hand gently. "You are alive. That is what matters most now. Whatever justice eventually comes for Ronan, it does not change the fact that you survived, that his plan ultimately failed." Over the following weeks, as word of Ronan's betrayal and subsequent flight spread throughout the pack, Elena watched Damien's recovery continue steadily, his strength returning day by day, his sharp mind and steady presence gradually reasserting themselves as the lingering effects of the poison finally began to fully clear from his system. The pack itself underwent its own difficult period of adjustment during this time, grappling with the revelation that a trusted member of the royal family had orchestrated such a devastating betrayal against his own brother and rightful Alpha King. Council sessions grew tense as members debated how best to restore stability and trust throughout the territory, how to identify and address the various loyalists Ronan had cultivated during his months of consolidated power. Councilwoman Isolde emerged as a steady, guiding voice throughout this difficult period, her early willingness to act on Elena's evidence earning her considerable respect and trust from both Damien and the broader council. She worked tirelessly alongside Elias and several other loyal council members to identify and address the lingering influence Ronan had built throughout the pack's administrative structure, gradually restoring balance and accountability to the territory's leadership. Elena, meanwhile, found herself in an increasingly complex position within the pack's social structure. Her role in uncovering the poisoning and securing the evidence needed to protect Damien had become widely known throughout the territory, earning her both gratitude and, from some quarters, renewed suspicion about the true nature of her closeness to the Alpha King. "The council has been discussing the matter of your position going forward," Isolde mentioned to Elena one afternoon, finding her in the palace gardens where she had been gathering herbs for Damien's continuing treatment. "Given everything you have done, and everything that transpired regarding your banishment, there is considerable sentiment that some form of formal recognition or restoration is warranted." "I do not require formal recognition," Elena said, though she appreciated the sentiment behind the councilwoman's words. "I only wish to see him safe and healthy again. That has been accomplished." "Perhaps," Isolde said, a knowing look passing across her weathered features. "But I suspect the council's sentiments on this matter, and Damien's own wishes, may extend rather further than you currently anticipate." Elena did not fully understand the implication behind Isolde's words at the time, though she would soon come to realize exactly what the older councilwoman had been hinting toward. Damien's recovery reached a significant milestone nearly 2 months after Ronan's flight from the territory, when he finally felt strong enough to formally address the full Pack Council, and, by extension, the broader Ashgrove community, for the first time since his illness had begun. The formal address was scheduled to take place in the Grand Hall, the same chamber where Elias's crucial testimony had turned the tide against Ronan's careful political maneuvering. Elena helped Damien prepare for the occasion, adjusting his formal attire with careful, practiced hands, noting with quiet satisfaction how much stronger and steadier he appeared, compared to the fragile, barely conscious figure she had found in that healing chamber so many months before. "Are you certain you are ready for this?" she asked, smoothing a final wrinkle from his formal jacket. "There is no shame in taking more time to recover fully before facing such a significant public appearance." "I have taken enough time," Damien said, his voice carrying the familiar steady confidence Elena remembered so fondly from before his illness had begun. "The pack deserves to hear directly from me, to understand what has happened and what comes next. And there is something else I intend to address during this session, something I have been considering carefully throughout these past weeks of recovery." Elena tilted her head curiously. "What matter is that?" Damien's expression grew warm, something tender and certain passing behind his eyes as he studied her face. "You will see soon enough. I have been giving considerable thought to the future of this pack, and to my own future as well, and I believe the time has come to make my intentions known formally, before the full council and the pack at large." Elena felt a flutter of nervous anticipation at his words, though she could not fully guess at what specific announcement he intended to make. Whatever it was, she trusted him completely, trusted the steady certainty in his voice, the warmth in his gaze, as he reached for her hand one final time before they made their way toward the Grand Hall together. The chamber was fuller than Elena had ever seen it. Council members and prominent pack citizens alike gathered to hear their Alpha King address them directly, for the first time in many long, difficult months. As Damien took his place at the head of the Grand Hall, standing tall and steady despite the lingering marks his illness had left upon him, a hushed, expectant silence fell over the assembled crowd. Elena remained near the front of the gathering, her heart pounding with an anticipation she could not fully explain, watching as Damien prepared to address the pack that had so nearly lost him. Damien's voice carried clearly through the Grand Hall as he began to speak, steady and strong, in a way that brought quiet tears of relief to many gathered within the chamber, who remembered vividly the frightening months of uncertainty that had preceded this moment. "Many of you have witnessed firsthand the difficult trials this pack has faced over recent months," he began, his gaze sweeping slowly across the assembled crowd. "I stand before you today because of the courage and dedication of individuals who refuse to accept my suffering as simply an unfortunate, unavoidable illness. I stand before you because they sought the truth, even when doing so placed them in considerable personal danger. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, many eyes turning briefly toward Elias, standing quietly near the side of the chamber, and toward Elena, near the front of the gathering. My brother Ronan believed that ambition justified betrayal, Damien continued, his voice hardening slightly as he addressed the matter directly. He believed that patience and calculation could disguise cruelty as concern, that careful manipulation could reshape truth itself in service of his own desires. He was wrong. The truth, however carefully buried, found its way to light, thanks to those brave enough to search for it, despite every obstacle placed in their path. He paused, allowing his words to settle over the silent chamber before continuing. I owe my life to the tireless dedication of elder healer Elias Grant, whose steady care and courageous testimony proved instrumental in exposing the truth before this council. I owe my life equally to Councilwoman Isolde, whose willingness to act decisively on incomplete but compelling evidence prevented what could easily have become an irreversible tragedy for this entire pack. Damien's gaze then settled directly on Elena, warmth and gratitude, and something far deeper passing behind his steady expression. And I owe my life, perhaps most of all, to a healer who refused to abandon me, even after being unjustly cast from these very lands. Elena Voss was banished from Ashgrove territory on false pretenses, designed specifically to remove the one person capable of uncovering my brother's betrayal. Rather than accepting that injustice, she spent months in quiet, dangerous investigation, ultimately risking her own safety repeatedly, to return and ensure the truth was finally exposed. A wave of appreciative murmurs and nods swept through the gathered crowd, many faces turning toward Elena with genuine warmth and respect that brought unexpected heat to her cheeks. During my long recovery, Damien continued, his voice growing softer, more personal despite still carrying clearly through the grand hall, I have had considerable time to reflect on many matters, not only the painful betrayal of my own brother, but also on what truly matters most, as I consider the future of this pack, and my own future as its leader. He turned fully toward Elena now, extending his hand toward her with quiet, unmistakable intention. Elena stepped forward, her heart pounding, uncertain exactly what was about to unfold, but trusting completely in the steady warmth of his gaze. Elena, Damien said, his voice carrying just for her, despite the full chamber listening intently to every word. You have proven, time and again, through actions rather than mere words, the depth of your loyalty, your courage, and your unwavering commitment to what is right, regardless of personal cost. I do not believe I would be standing here today without your determination and sacrifice. He turned back toward the assembled council and pack citizens, raising his voice once more to address them formally. It is with full confidence and no small measure of gratitude that I wish to make known before this entire pack my intention to name Elena Voss as my chosen mate, and further, given the circumstances that so nearly cost this pack its rightful leadership, to establish her formally as co-alpha, alongside myself, sharing equally in the responsibilities and protections of this territory going forward. The chamber erupted into a mixture of surprised gasps and enthusiastic approval, the formal announcement carrying implications far beyond simple romantic partnership. Establishing a co-alpha position was a rare and significant decision within pack tradition, typically reserved for periods of exceptional circumstance, requiring shared, trusted leadership. Elena stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the sudden weight and significance of Damien's words, before Isolde's voice rose above the chamber's excited murmurs. As acting head of council during recent proceedings, I formally recognize and support this declaration, Isolde announced. Given Elena Voss's demonstrated courage, integrity, and unwavering dedication to this pack's true well-being, I believe there could be no more fitting choice to stand alongside our Alpha King as we move forward from this difficult chapter. Other council members quickly voiced their agreement, the chamber filling with a growing wave of support that left Elena momentarily speechless. She turned to face Damien directly, searching his warm, steady expression for any hint of uncertainty or hesitation, finding instead only quiet, unwavering conviction. "Are you certain this is what you wish?" she asked quietly, though her voice carried enough that those nearest them could hear the genuine question behind her words. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," Damien said, reaching for both her hands now, his grip steady and warm, in a way that spoke to how completely his strength had returned. You stood by me when everyone else either abandoned me or actively worked against me. You risked everything, repeatedly, without hesitation, without seeking recognition or reward. I cannot imagine building this pack's future with anyone other than you standing beside me." Elena felt tears finally slipping free, tears of relief and joy, and overwhelming gratitude for everything that had led them to this remarkable moment. "Then yes," she said, her voice steady, despite the emotion coursing through her. "I accept, gladly, completely." The chamber erupted into genuine celebration, the formal proceedings giving way to warm applause and enthusiastic well-wishes from council members and citizens alike, relief and joy replacing the tension and fear that had characterized the pack's atmosphere for so many difficult months. In the weeks that followed, Ashgrove territory began its careful process of healing and rebuilding, under the newly formalized leadership of Damien and Elena together. The formal binding ceremony establishing Elena's position as both mate and co-alpha was celebrated with genuine warmth throughout the pack, a stark and welcome contrast to the fear and uncertainty that had gripped the territory during Ronan's calculated rise to power. Elias continued serving as elder healer, his role and reputation within the pack stronger than ever, given his crucial role in exposing the truth. Councilwoman Isolde took on an expanded advisory position within the newly restructured council, helping guide the pack through the ongoing process of identifying and addressing any remaining influence Ronan had cultivated during his months of consolidated power. Word eventually reached Ashgrove territory that Ronan had resurfaced in a distant, unaffiliated territory far to the north, though he made no further attempts to challenge Damien's leadership or return to the lands from which he had been formally exiled. Whatever ambitions still burned within him, they remained, for now, safely beyond Ashgrove's borders. Elena often found herself reflecting, during quiet evening walks along the eastern ridge with Damien, on the strange, difficult journey that had brought them to this point. The terror of that first terrible night in the healing chamber, the devastating isolation of her unjust banishment, the long, uncertain months of careful investigation and dangerous risk that had finally exposed the truth and restored balance to a pack nearly destroyed by one man's calculated ambition. "Do you ever regret it?" Damien asked her one evening, as they stood together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. "Everything you sacrificed, everything you risked, simply to save someone who could offer you nothing certain in return." Elena considered the question seriously, though her answer came without hesitation. "Never. Not for a single moment. Some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the uncertainty or the risk involved. You were always worth fighting for, Damien. From the very first night I refused to give up on you." Damien smiled, pulling her closer as the sun continued its slow descent below the distant horizon. "Then I am endlessly grateful that you are the kind of person who refuses to give up, even when everything and everyone else suggests surrender would be the easier path." They stood together in comfortable silence as the last light of day faded into the gentle darkness of evening, two people who had weathered betrayal, danger, and devastating uncertainty together, now standing firmly united as partners in leading their pack toward a stronger, more trustworthy future. The Ashgrove pack, having survived its darkest chapter through courage, loyalty, and an unshakable commitment to truth, entered a new era under the shared leadership of Alpha King Damien and his rightful Luna, Elena, their bond forged not merely through circumstance, but through the fire of shared struggle and mutual, unwavering devotion. What had begun with an unjust banishment, a desperate attempt to silence the one person capable of exposing a dangerous betrayal, ultimately became the very foundation upon which a stronger, more resilient pack was rebuilt. Elena Voss, once cast out into the cold with nothing but a travel cloak and a promise to herself, now stood as living proof that truth, courage, and unwavering loyalty could triumph even against the most carefully calculated deception. And as the pack settled into its hard-won peace, the story of the healer who refused to abandon her king, even when the entire world seemed determined to keep them apart, became a quiet legend whispered throughout Ashgrove territory for generations to come.